What connects a post-9/11 thriller, a love story, born from exile, a post-partition family saga, and a 19th century battlefield to a New York politician calling for a ceasefire today? The thread is simple and undeniable. War rarely stays on the front lines. It seeps into airports and classrooms, into romance and memory, into city budgets and nonprofit ledgers. This is a story about how filmmaker Mira Nair and politician Zohran Mamdani, mother and son, confront conflict from different stages, one with a camera, the other with a microphone on the steps of power. Mira Nair doesn't make war movies in the conventional sense. She makes human stories at the edges of war, where policy becomes personal and ideology turns into decisions that rearrange lives. In The Reluctant Fundamentalist, 2012, she adapts Masala novel into a post-9/11 tale about suspicion, identity, and the long shadow of the war on terror. A gifted Pakistani graduate, seemingly at home in elite American institutions, is strip-searched, surveilled, and gradually transformed not into a caricatured villain, but into a critic of the moral bargains demanded by an endless conflict. Nair's lens lingers on the cultural fallout, the way fear hardens into profiling, the way foreign policy ripples through cubicles, airports, and dinner tables. There are no battle scenes here, just the steady tightening of a social vice, and the question it poses to anyone caught in it: who am I allowed to be if Reluctant Fundamentalist maps the war's shadow in the United States? Mississippi Masala 1991 begins under another kind of rupture. Idi Amin's 1972 expulsion of Asians from Uganda. The film opens on the panic of forced departure, families told to leave, homes abandoned, and a Rashand then cuts to Mississippi years later, where a new life is being stitched together with old threads. The love story that follows is tender, messy, and defiantly human. But it never lets you forget its origin. A political decree that turned citizens into refugees. War here is not only soldiers and guns. It is paperwork and checkpoints, and the quieter wars inside families over home, dignity, and the right to belong. Nair frames exile not as an end, but as a condition that shapes how people speak, love, and dream. Long after the headlines move on, with A Suitable Boy 2020, Nair turns to India in 1951. Newly independent and freshly scarred by partition, land reform, elections. An interfaith tension formed the atmospheric pressure around a young woman choosing a husband, domestic plot that doubles as a national allegory. The questions are intimate duty or deceit, tradition or change, but every answer carries the echo of trains packed with the displaced and neighborhoods split by fear. The series is not about gunfire. It's about the aftershocks of violence and how communities rebuild themselves when the map and the trust it once implied has been torn in two. Even in Vanity Fair 2004, Nair's adaptation of Thackeray, personal ambition is set against the boom of cannons. And Becky shops rise and fall unfolds while history rearranges Europe. A reminder that the fates of individuals can hinge on decisions made far away. One moment, you're counting coins. The next, you're counting losses. The film doesn't dwell on the battlefield, but that single field of bodies haunts the nursery scenes that follow. History changes hands in a cradle, and with it the debts, duties, and desires of a generation. Shift now from cinema to City Hall, where Zohran Mamdani Mira, Nair's son, presses conflict into the language of policy and protest. In October 2023, during demonstrations in New York calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, he was arrested for civil disobedience outside Senator Chuck Schumer's Brooklyn home. The image is stark. An elected official on the sidewalk, choosing the risk of handcuffs to underline a demand that the war as human toll be counted and answered. Weeks later, outside the White House, he joined a hunger strike for a permanent ceasefire, part of a broader movement that asked a blunt question: what does it mean in practical terms to insist on the protection of civilian life? Mamdani also tried to rebalance the conflict through law. His Not on Our Dime bill in New York aimed to stop state-registered charities from funding activities tied to settlement expansion, an attempt to connect war to wallets by saying that tax-advantaged dollars should not underwrite facts on the ground that inflamed the conflict. Supporters framed it as aligning state policy with international law and humanitarian principles. Critics argued it overreached or unfairly targeted certain organizations, but beyond the legislative tug-of-war, the bill crystallized a core idea. If wars are sustained by logistics and money, then accountability must also travel those same routes. Put side by side, Nair's films and Mamdani's actions sketch a continuum of engagement. One turns consequences into images we can't forget. The other turns those images into actions we can't ignore. The Mother's work shows how conflict writes itself into everyday life. Into the look a security guard gives you, the silence at a dinner table when a homeland is mentioned, the border that sneaks into a love story. The son's work insists that conscience should be legible in public policy, that budgets, permits, and tax codes are not neutral, and that citizens have a right to know what their money is making possible. There is also an ancestral echo running through both. The long memory of displacement. The 1972 expulsion from Uganda is not just history in Mississippi. It is family history in the Mamdani household. That experience, and the broader story of partition's upheaval, suggest why these concerns never feel abstract in their work. Exile teaches you to look for the moment when the seemingly distant becomes suddenly intimate. It trains you to see how quickly a label foreigner, suspect, settler, refugee can be stamped on a life. So what ties all of this together? The insistence that war is not a genre. It is a weather system. It doesn't simply happen over there. It changes the pressure everywhere, and people adapt to her, break accordingly. In Nair's films, the adaptation is cultural and emotional. Communities renegotiating belonging, lovers arguing with history, families trying to pass on something gentler than what they received. In Mamdani's politics, the adaptation is procedural and public. Rallies, arrests, bills, coalitions, levers pulled so that the most vulnerable don't shoulder the cost alone. If there is a provocation here, it is this. Stories and systems are both battlefields. The stories we elevate teach us whom to fear and whom to protect. The systems we design decide whose fear is answered and whose protection is funded. Mira Nair asks us to watch more closely, to see the human scale at which grand policies are felt. Zohran Mamdani asks us to act more precisely, to follow the money and name what it is doing. Which matters more, will you live the stories you tell about war, or the systems that finance it? And if the honest answer is both, then the real work begins. To make images that widen our circle of care, and to pass laws that match the scale of that care.